Hey there, and welcome back to Common Knowledge, the show where I take a look at 10 common Magic the Gathering cards and tell you if they're any good in the Pauper format or not. Let's get right into it with our first card of the day. It's Death Ward, which we've definitely done before. I remember this art. So we're not going to count this one. I did want to look at some of the other arts, though. Yeah, it's whatever. It's a single white mana for an instant. You regenerate target creature. That's fine. We have better protection available in the format. I remember probably not giving this a very good score, and I would continue to not give it a very good score, but we'll skip it for today and just move on to the next one, which is Blood Crazed Hoplite. 1 and a black for a 2/1 human soldier with heroic. Whenever you cast a spell that targets this creature, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. I like that. Whenever a +1/+1 counter is put on this creature, remove a +1/+1 counter from target creature an opponent controls. That's interesting. It's like a anti-heroic card, and that's pretty cool. I have never seen this card before. I wonder how this works. Black doesn't have. I mean, mono white heroic is obviously a deck in the Pauper format, but white has so many spells that target your own creatures or are meant to target your own creatures, and black doesn't as much. I mean, sure, there's still auras that you can play that are in black, and there aren't terrible ones. Like an Unholy Strength would make this thing quite big, right? The Unholy Strength itself is +2/+1, so that'd be 4/2, and then it gets a +1/+1 counter, so it'd be a 5/3. That's that's really solid to spend 3 mana and get a 5/3. That's a really good return on investment. But what other black spells are you really using? I mean, there's protection spells. There's like ones that can give your creature indestructible or lifelink. But you're not getting all of the good stuff that you get from white when it comes to that. So you'd kind of have to like dip into Ortsov, and maybe you could do that. Maybe you could. And you could certainly try other colors as well. Green would be a pretty good one with all the combat tricks in there. Red could be pretty good with all the combat tricks they have. Blue, maybe not so much. But this doesn't seem to be a very bad card at all. You know, 1 for 2, I don't love, but knowing that you're getting these +1/+1 counters, and also knowing that you can, there's enough stuff on other decks that are using +1/+1 counters that this second ability here could come in handy sometimes. You know, it would be good against mono black sack to take +1/+1 counters off the carrion feeder or the mortician beetle. It could be good against Jund Wildfire that's doing things with Gixian Infiltrator. It can certainly work against mono white heroic, which is putting the counters on there. So there are a handful of decks that use +1/+1 counters relatively effectively, and even something that plays Avenging Hunter and has the +1/+1 counters from the Forge of the initiative. That can take away some of those counters as well. I don't hate it. It's still probably not a fantastic card, but I kind of like it, and I actually want to probably pick some copies up just in case I do build some kind of deck with this. Maybe not a Pauper deck, but just a deck that I would want to play. I'm gonna write this one down. Blood Crazed Hoplite. Neat card. Score wise, I think I could go for something like a 3.4 on this. Seems decent. Crack Open is our next card. It's 2 and a green for a sorcery. Destroy target artifact or enchantment, and you create a treasure token. Okay. Sorcery speed I really don't like. That's pretty tough. These kind of naturalize effects that have gravy are interesting to me because it really does depend on how good the gravy is. And the problem is you're kind of getting a bit of a setback here at the sorcery speed. I don't know how I feel about that. You know, naturalize is 1 and a green for an instant that says destroy target artifact or enchantment. And I think I would still just take that over this. And we have lots of other variants of naturalize that are even better than naturalize. So spending 3 mana, getting a treasure token back, I mean that can be useful. It's an artifact which ups your artifact count. Green generally doesn't care about that, but I suppose there are decks that could make that happen. It is a treasure token, so it is able to not filter mana exactly, but at least fix mana temporarily if you're in a multicolored deck, or it is just straight up ramp at some point for a green deck that wants to go bigger. I don't think that makes me feel good enough about spending 3 mana at sorcery speed to get rid of one of those artifacts or enchantments. If this exiled the artifact or enchantment, that would probably be a stronger argument. But since it doesn't, I just don't know. And this was from Modern Horizons 2. Man, it just feels like this should have been better. Maybe it was instant speed at one point and they decided it was too good. I guess I could see that happening. But I think this is too bad for the Pauper format and honestly for most things. So I'll give Crack Open a 2.9. It still is a pretty good removal spell, but being a little slow, I think, dips it down into the twos. Ooh, here's a good one. Mesmeric Fiend is 1 and a black for a 1/1 Nightmare Horror. When this creature enters, target opponent reveals their hand, and you choose a non-land card from it, and you exile that card. When this creature leaves the battlefield, return the exiled card to its owner's hand. So it's a little bit like a Deep Cavern Bat if you've played Standard in the last couple of years. And that's already kind of cool. Just taking something from my opponent's hand, disrupting their strategy, not bad. And then, this guy stays on the board and your opponent has to burn a removal spell to go get their card back, so it kind of ruins some of their tempo as well. That's generally just good. But what makes this card really good is that these are two separate lines of text. These are two separate abilities. And so what you can do, and it's the same kind of thing you can do with Oblivion Ring, because that's also two different lines of text, is that when this first ability triggers, whenever this creature enters, target opponent reveals their hand, you exile a non-land card from it, that you can respond to. And so this gets played in decks with heavy sacrifice effects like Mono Black Sacrifice. And what they'll do, you play this card, and before the effect happens, you sacrifice it to your Carrion Feeder. And then this is no longer on the table, but its ability is still on the stack. So the ability still happens where you exile the card. But now that the card is gone, the second ability never triggers because it can't leave the battlefield because it's not on the battlefield anymore. It wasn't on the battlefield to be able to get that effect. I mean, it was, but by the time that effect triggered, it didn't have a card underneath it because you sacrificed it. And so that just means you can exile a card from your opponent's hand forever. So two mana. If you think of it that way, with the Carrion Feeder, this is 2 mana to exile a card of your choosing, a non-land card of your choosing from your opponent's hand, and you put a +1/+1 counter on your Carrion Feeder. That's a pretty good effect. Mesmeric Fiend is one of the better forms of hand disruption and not discarding, but card denial, I suppose. It's right up there with cards like Divest and Duress, and damn, it's good. And it can also just be a creature. It's something that you can go find if you're playing Golgari style decks. You can go find it with Winding Way or go find it with Lead the Stampede. That can be useful as well. It is just a really solid creature, whether you're doing the tricky form of it and sacrificing it before the ability triggers, or even if you're just playing this very traditionally and taking a card and forcing your opponent in the tempo play. That's cool. Mesmeric Fiend's a good card. I think it's seen a little less play over the years. We've just started to find other cards that can do hand disruption faster, maybe, or can do it more consistently. Like you'll see something like Ortsov Blade use the Refurbished Familiar and bounce it back to their hand and play it again and again. And the question is it better to force your opponent to discard 2 or 3 cards, or is it better to exile a card that they'll never get back? And that's a tough question, but I think a lot of people are preferring to just take 2 or 3 cards away from their opponents. And so this has seen a little less play. It still does see play, though. I am going to give it a good score. I think I'm actually going to give it like a 6.2. Cool card. Not the cheapest card to get. I know there's this list printing for under $1, but these are mostly over $1, especially if you want the really nice Torment version, which is definitely my preference. But uh, I remember with TCG Player, it was actually pretty expensive because there just weren't a whole lot of copies available. I think Mana Pool made it a little easier when I switched over to Mana Pool. I've just been generally been getting better prices on that, but TCG Player was still like, hey, they're the ones with all the copies of cards, and this was still a hard card to get a hold of. So I wonder if that's changed with any of these additional printings. I don't know. Next up is Elite Instructor. 2 and a blue for a 2/2 human wizard. And when this creature enters, you draw a card and then discard a card. That is so incredibly normal and not particularly great. 3 mana for this effect. I mean, I know it's... So you're getting a grizzly bear here, but you're paying an extra mana, and the extra mana is so you can loot once. I just think we can loot way better than this. We've seen looters recently on the channel that are better than this. I just don't think this does enough. Like if I'm paying this much, I would want this creature to connive. Because that's the same thing. I'm drawing a card and discarding a card, but at least I'm getting an extra +1/+1 counter. And then if you go, okay, well, it can be a 3 mana 3/3, I think that can be worth it. As is, though, I think this is a really boring card and certainly not something that's going to be played in Pauper because it's just too vanilla. And not generically good vanilla, just vanilla flat. So I'll go with a 2.3. And we'll move on to the next one. Prosperous Pirates is 4 and a blue for a 3/4 human pirate. When this creature enters, you create 2 treasure tokens. Ooh, that could be pretty good. This is a little pricey. It's 4 and a blue for a 3/4. That does feel, more than I would necessarily want to pay, but it is paying you 2 back. These treasure tokens come into play untapped, so you can use them immediately. That fixes a lot of mana for you if you really need that. And what could be really cool is if you're playing this in some kind of familiars style deck, or it doesn't even have to be familiars, but that's just the one I'm thinking of because that's Azorius. This pairs super well with Ephemerate. You play this guy, you make 2 treasure tokens. Your opponent tries to deal with them, or you even just block an opponent's creature that is going to kill this guy, and you cast Ephemerate. And you spend one of your treasure tokens to ephemerate this guy. And then he comes back and he makes 2 more treasure tokens. So now you have a total of 3. And then ephemerate has the rebound and it bounces this guy again, or flickers this guy again. And now you've got 5 treasure tokens. That's really good. Like, this is a good engine once you can get it going. And the problem is, of course, getting it going because it is 5 mana to start with and the creature has no evasion. Is that worth it to you? And the answer is probably no. You probably just have better things that you can blink in your blue deck, like Archaeomancers and things like that. But there is an engine here, and it could be really, really good. You can get a lot of treasure tokens, which, again, we talked about treasure tokens just a little bit ago, but artifacts on the table, fixing mana, ramping, and putting 2 of those out that's really good. That can be a really good deal. I'll give this guy a 4, I think. I like him. I like him quite a bit. Pounce is 1 and a green for an instant. Target creature you control fights target creature you don't control. Not good enough. We already have instant speed bite effects that aren't. So a fight effect here is that each creature deals damage to equal to its power to the other creature. So your creature is taking damage back. And that can be fine if you just have a giant creature and the opponent has a smaller creature. No big deal. Your creature still lives. But you'd still prefer a bite effect, which is just your creature doing damage to their creature and nothing coming back. So The one that we use most often these days is still, well, not Rabid Bite. That's the one that's the bite effect, but Ram Through is the bite effect we use most often today, which is target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control, and then there's a little extra gravy on it, which makes this one better than most of the others. Um, Wizards, when these kinds of cards were first coming out, you'd have fight effects that were at instant speed, and then the bite effects, which are better, generally were at sorcery speed if they were the same mana cost, or they would cost an extra mana to. It usually cost 3 to do a bite style effect. And as we've gone on, I think fight effects have fallen a little bit out of favor as we've learned that bites are just fine. Like they're not so much better than fight effects that we need to split them up and make them different. This is just kind of the green removal that we're all okay with. So most of the things that we get now are bite effects in green. There are still some fight effects, but the bite ones are generally the ones that you want to play. So Pounce is just not something that would be played in the Pauper format these days. We just have a number of better cards that are still at the same speed and at the same mana cost. So Pounce, unfortunately, I'm gonna give it a 2.5 because it is still a halfway decent removal spell. It's just not good enough for this format anymore. Maybe something you could do with a cube if you're limiting the amount of green removal cards that are in there. This might be good there. Maybe if it's a dinosaur theme or something like that. But for our purposes, nah, not really. Conduit Goblin is a Modern Horizons 3 card, so it must be busted, right? Maybe not in this case. We'll see. Boros mana, red and a white for a 2/2 Goblin Warrior, and when this creature enters, you get 2 energy. Okay. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you may pay a single energy. If you do, another target creature you control gets +1/+0 and gains haste until end of turn. That's not too bad. So this does come down. You play this on your first main phase. It comes down. You get 2 energy. You move to your combat phase. You can pay 1 of the energy that you just got and turn this guy into a 3/2 with haste for 2 mana. That's not a bad rate. That's not too bad. And then you'll also have another energy ready for the next turn. So if you play something bigger and better, you're also able to give that haste and +1/+0 until the turn, and that swings in too. So this does give you a bit of decent value. It's cheap enough where it's something that you could blink and bounce in some kind of Boros synthesizer list. Maybe you're already bouncing stuff in that deck anyway. You play this, you play a core Skyfisher, you bounce this back to your hand, you can play it again, get a whole lot more energy. We know that Boros energy has been really strong in Modern, but haven't really seen that happen in the Pauper format. But there are cards that could support this quite well. There's is it Galvanic? No, it's not Galvanic Blast. It's Galvanic Discharge. That's the one I'm thinking of. Yeah, Galvanic Blast is a better card, but Galvanic Discharge is the one that gets you some energy counters. There's a card that I really like in my Boros deck that's mostly about equipment, but that's Inventor's Axe. And when it comes down, you also get a couple energy. It comes down to flash speed. So there are the bones of an energy deck in Pauper. I just don't think we've really seen anybody put it together to something that's competitive. Even if there were, would it play Conduit Goblin? I'm not sure. I don't know if that deck necessarily needs to be Boros colors. Seems like it certainly needs to be red. There's plenty of red cards that want to do all these energy things, but does it need to be Boros? Maybe. Like, this is a decent dude. He's not great, but he's a decent dude, and I think if you were building a deck around energy, you might consider playing this guy, getting 2 energy for 2 mana, and a decent dude, and an outlet for what you do with that energy. None of those things are bad. I'm going to go for a 3.7 on this guy, and I think he has room to grow. Not a bad little card. Bold Defense is 2 and a white for an instant, and it's also got Kicker for 3 and a white, which means you can pay an additional 3 and a white as you cast the spell. Creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. If the spell was kicked, instead, creatures you control get +2/+2 and gain first strike until end of turn. Oh boy, this costs too much. It costs too much for its normal mode. I don't want to pay 3 mana to give all my creatures +1/+1. I think that's something we can get cheaper, or if not cheaper, at least get a stronger effect for the 3 mana. But then kicking this to pay another 3 and a white, so now you're paying 7 mana altogether to give all your creatures +2/+2 and first strike. Come on. We can definitely have an effect that's better than that. This is extremely slow, extremely cost prohibitive in this format. That is not going to fly. It's not going to fly in Pack Beast. It's not going to fly in Mono White Weenie. It's just not going to happen. This is not a very good card. I think I'll go with like a 2.2. Cannibalize. We've done this one because I remember talking about the art. Let's talk about it real quick. Cannibalizes is 1 and a black for a sorcery. Choose 2 target creatures controlled by the same player. Exile one of those creatures and put 2 +1/+1 counters on the other. That's fun. It's fun that it's a removal spell, but also kind of a buff. You could get rid of one of your own tokens and like a little 1/1 token or something, and then buff up one of your other creatures. Maybe it's in like a Golgari Gardens deck, and you can exile the plant token, the 0/1 plant that you get from the Colony Garden, and buff up something else to be pretty decent. That's okay, and certainly you can use it as a removal spell on your opponent as well. You get to choose the target creatures and exile one of them. That can exile a Sneaky Snacker, or it can exile, any problem permanent that might come back. And that's not bad. And yeah, you're putting a couple +1/+1 counters on another creature, but maybe, if you're the one who's selecting all this stuff, you can make sure it's not a creature that's going to be that big of a deal. It's something to consider. I think it's not as bad as it might look on the face of it. And I do like that it has versatility using it offensively or defensively. It's still not a particularly great card. I don't know what we gave it before. I'm not counting it this time, but I would probably give it something like a 3.1, maybe. Anyway, let's move on. Disciple of the Old Ways is 1 and a green for a 2/2 human warrior. You can pay a red, and this creature gains first strike until end of turn. It's too bad it says this creature. I would love it to give it to another creature. As it stands, this is just slightly better than a grizzly bear. Very slightly. Especially since it's a different color of mana that you have to spend for the activated ability. It dictates a little bit more of the decks that this is going to go in, or could go in, and that's also just not helping it. It already wasn't a great card, and forcing it to be in a deck that can make multiple colors just makes it even worse. I don't even think this isn't good enough. The ability isn't good enough to get this over Grizzly Bear status to me. I will just give this a 2. Same that I would give Grizzly Bears. What do we have as our 5th card? Oh, our 10th card, I mean. It's War Mammoth. I remember the professor having a story about one of the very first Magic decks he made was a deck that was it just all War Mammoths and Giant Growths, or maybe it was War Mammoths and Lightning Bolts, something like that. But the idea was that he didn't know, or at least at one point Magic didn't have the 4 copies per deck rule. But I think this was late enough that they had gone to the 4 copies per deck rule, but he just didn't know that when he was starting to play. And he went, well, how could you beat this? How can you beat these 3/3s with trample that I'm putting down every turn? And I can just have a ton of them, and I'll just run over my opponents. And that's cute. That's a good story. It reminds me of stories when I first started playing Magic, where my friends and I didn't know what trample was. We didn't know how trample worked. We knew how flying worked. Flying was very intuitive. Trample was less intuitive to us, and we ended up using it as basically as just another form of flying. If your creature had trample, that meant any creature that didn't have trample wouldn't be able to block it. We didn't know what we were doing. We didn't know the rules until, finally somebody learned. I don't know if they looked at something on the internet or saw something from a magazine and went, "Hey, wait, we've been playing with Trample all wrong," and that made Aurochs a way worse card, and that made me sad. War Mammoth is not a good card. It's a classic card, but it's not a very good one. A 4 mana 3/3 with Trample just doesn't cut it these days. Um, it's better than a Hill Giant though, just barely, but it is. So I'll give this a 2.1. It does clear the Grizzly Bear Hill Giant threshold, not by much, but it does. Let's do a bonus card and call it a day. And that bonus card is Vidalcan Ghoul, which is Dimir mana, blue and black, for a 1/1 Vidalcan zombie. And whenever this creature becomes blocked, defending player loses 4 life. Is that afflict? I think we've keyworded that as afflict at somewhere. So it would be like afflict 4. Is that right? Aren't there like slivers with afflict or something? Maybe that was from Time Spiral. Yeah, whenever this creature becomes blocked, defending player loses 3 life. Okay, so yeah, afflict 3. Hey, look at me, knowing stuff about Magic cards. It's kind of interesting. So it's a 1/1 that your opponent just doesn't want to block, because wouldn't you rather just take 1 damage than lose 4 life? And the answer is probably yes, but this being paired with curiosity style effects where the creature can draw a card if it deals combat damage, now your opponent has a tougher decision to make. If you buff up this creature and put a bunch of auras on it or +1/+1 counters on it, now your opponent has the bad decision: do I let 5 damage get through and or do I block this 5/5 now and lose my creature and lose 4 life, or do I just let the guy in and know that I'm guaranteed to lose only 4 life that way? Is that a good enough trade for me? But you also know that this guy's just going to come in again for the next turn. So there is something kind of cool here. I generally don't like paying 2 mana for a 1/1, but in this case, I think it's neat. Is it good enough for the Pauper format? Probably not. It itself is too slow. You do need to rely on a lot of other cards to make this work. You know, this isn't a Moon Circuit Hacker, you know? It doesn't just have a damage trigger on it, and I think that's probably because it was made in Alara Reborn and not, a more modern set. A more modern set, I think, would give this something that, hey, when this creature deals combat damage, something else happens, because that is just the way that Wizards makes cards these days. Um, I still think there's something to it. I think this would be a fun cube card if you were, building some kind of cube that specifically was doing things with combat damage. And so now you're just forcing your opponent into weird decisions. I like it. I like it for that, but I don't necessarily like it for much of anything else. Let's go with a 2.6, and that's probably too high, but I like the card. What can I say? And we'll call that a day. Thanks for joining me. We'll catch you on the next one. Bye.